Well, there's a lot of potential feedbacks that occur when the sea ice retreats in the summer, and most of the feedbacks concern acceleration of warming. There'll be because the sea ice has retreated, it changes the albedo of the Earth, and that increases the rate of global warming. And also the warmer air from the retreat of sea ice gives you increased melt rate of the Greenland ice sheet, and that gives you an increased rate of sea level rise. So two of the big things are that warming itself speeds up and sea level rise accelerates, and there are a number of other feedbacks as well, but those are the two of the main ones. Well, we did a study on that that was published in Nature, and it really, if the amount of methane that's released is as much as the Russian group supposes, then that would be enough to increase global warming by about 0.6 of a degree within a decade, which is really warming the Earth by nearly as much as it's warmed up in the last 100 years, all in 10 years. So it's a big boost to the rate of global warming, and that would mean that all the processes that are going on with global warming are just double in speed, basically. So it would be quite disastrous. Well, as far as we can see, the rate is increasing. The last field measurements were done in 2014, and it was not only did they find that there was methane release at an accelerated rate in the East Siberian Sea, but two other expeditions in other Arctic seas, the Laptev Sea and the Barents Sea, both found methane release going on there. So the area over which methane is being released is greater than people previously thought, and the volume is higher. So it's certainly the amount of methane coming out the seabed is going up. So the question is, will it go up as seriously as the Russians think? Well, it's partly just the lag time, because the IPCC only deals with published papers, and they don't consider any work in progress or new measurements. So every measurement that is considered by IPCC is about 3 years out of date. So anything new is not dealt with. But of course, IPCC is supposed to be giving us some warning of climate change and pointing us in directions to do something about it. And so I think it's failing to do that because I think it just doesn't want to arouse alarm. And I think there's a kind of tendency in IPCC towards complacency and not wanting to get people worried, which is not the way it ought to be, but that's the way it is. Well, even without any more carbon emissions, we're committed to 2 degrees of warming, because we've had 1 degree and less than half of the potential warming of that amount of carbon dioxide has been realised. So the realised warming is about half of what you'll end up with. So if we hold carbon levels to be the same as they are now, we'll still end up with 2 degrees of warming before the end of the century. So what we're actually going to be doing is, of course, increasing carbon dioxide levels, so we'll get to 2 degrees quicker than that, maybe in 30 years' time. Well, 2 degrees will be noticeable. I mean, it's already, I think, global warming is noticeable, but 2 degrees will be much more noticeable. it won't be yet catastrophic. It will change. There'll be a lot of noticeable changes in weather, climate, growth of plants and trees. That in every way we'll know that something's changed, but it won't be enough to really wipe anything out. But when it gets to 4 degrees, that's when you really get worried. Well, the predictions from IPCC are that 4 degrees will be reached about the end of the century, and if there's a business as usual scenario where carbon emissions keep rising at about the present rate, then we'll get 4 degrees of warming by the end of the century, and that will be very significant. That's going to be enough to really cause a lot of catastrophic effects.
With sea level rises as well.
Yes, the sea level. Well,
about a metre, I think you said.
Yes, IPCC has increased its predictions, but it hasn't increased them enough. It went up from 30 to 60 centimetres, but they're not taking account of all the big changes in the ice sheets that are going on, and I think there's going to be at least a metre, and maybe a lot more than a metre, and that's going to have a huge effect on coastal cities, obviously. I think that would be enough to really seriously disrupt civilization. I mean, first of all, it would have a really big impact on food production. So just when the world population is rising exponentially, our capability of producing food is going to flatten off and go down because of that, the effect of that warming and the extreme weather that's going to go with it means we won't be able to produce as much food. So the first disruption will be starvation and because all the unrest and warfare that goes along with that, because people don't just sit and starve, they start rioting and invading other countries and so on. So there'll be massive amounts of disturbance, unrest, warfare, and actual starvation going on if you have 4 degrees of warming. So that's, if you just thinking about food production, it will be catastrophic. Well, at the present rate, the 6 degrees will be reached quite soon after, maybe 2030, something like that. No, sorry, 2130. No, not if it's 4 degrees by the end of the century, and the rate of rise is going up, which it is, then 6 degrees will be reached by about 2130 or so, 2140, by which time things will be really catastrophic. No, I don't think it could. I mean, you can, as an individual, you can survive that amount of warming if you live especially if you live in a cool climate. But the organised society, I don't think could withstand that amount of warming. Well, something approaching a runaway warming is possible. I mean, mostly when you talk about runaway warming, you think about the planet Venus, planets that lost their atmosphere and that sort of thing. But Earth is it's not going to go like that. But it is already semi-runaway in the sense that at least half of the warming we're getting now is not directly due to the CO2 we're putting into the atmosphere. It's due to all the feedbacks. So that you put a certain amount of CO2 into the atmosphere, you can calculate how much increase in radiative forcing that produces, how much warming should result from that alone, and you find that in fact the warming is at least 50% more. So you're adding at least 50% to the warming because of the feedbacks that are due to the effects of that warming, like the retreat of sea ice and what that does to global albedo. So we already got a 50% runaway that we add some CO2. The increase in warming is much more than we ought to get. A runaway would be if we don't add any CO2 and we still get the warming. So in other words, it's where you don't. It's like Jimi Hendrix' guitar, where in the end, it was all feedback. He didn't even have to touch the string. Everything the noise the guitar produced was entirely feedback. So if you get to a point where the warming of the planet is entirely feedback, and it happens whether or not you add CO2, then that's runaway warming, and that could happen, but it hasn't yet. Well, I don't think extinction will be directly produced by the warming, but what could be produced by the warming is a nuclear war, and that would produce extinction. So it could be an indirect effect of warming, could be collapse of civil society, and given the technology we have, which is nuclear weapons, that could produce extinction. I think it's a good idea. It only puts a sticking plaster on warming because it doesn't remove the forcing. It just takes away the effect for a certain length of time, as long as you keep doing it. So that in itself is really useful. So I think we probably need to do it, but once we start doing it, we have to keep on doing it because we haven't removed the carbon dioxide. We're just trying to reduce the effect of the carbon dioxide. Well, I'm pessimistic because having been to previous conferences and seen the people, I'm not too optimistic. I mean, they're basically, these are deals done between countries, and they will do things that are in their own interests, not things that are in the interests of the planet. And when I went to a UNFCCC meeting in Bonn, and there were 2,000 delegates there, and we gave a presentation on climate change, which had been arranged, and it clashed with a reception at the end of a day's session. And of those 2,000 delegates, 11 of them came to our climate change presentation, and 1,989 went to drink. So I think that indicated the degree of their concern with climate change. Well, this was put forward by, there was an essay or book by Naomi Klein, who was a journalist, saying you can't solve climate change as long as you still have capitalism. And it's quite a strong argument, but the trouble is we're not going to get rid of capitalism easily, but we've got climate change now, so we've got to try and deal with climate change within the capitalist system, because we haven't got time to change that system and then deal with climate change. We have to deal with climate change now. Well, yes, it's absolutely necessary and vital, but it always has been. That's the only way that the human race is going to survive, if it has a cooperative society and people work together. That's always been true, and it's why we're in such a mess so it's as true now as ever. Well, all we can do is work together, and scientists, I think, have a duty to speak out. They tend not to do so because they're too firstly because they feel they should be focusing on their scientific work, and then also often their careers and promotions are based on doing things which are actually fairly destructive. Like if they've got a climate model which is not very good, rather than change it, they would rather keep using it if it's a government-run model and their promotion depends on using that model, like the British Met Office model. So often scientists don't speak out, but I think they have to, because they're the only people really who can say with some certainty these things are going on. Everybody else can say, in my opinion, we're heading for disaster, but a scientist can say, my measurements show that we're heading for disaster. So the scientist should be speaking out, if anybody does. But I think the problem is most scientists are not speaking out, and that's disaster.